Chapter 14. The First Fire. The workers climbed down from the roof and onto the scaffolding and hiked speedily down the hall, nodding their heads toward the young prince as they passed. Ronduin and his father followed them at a slower pace.
"Dark clouds coming this way,"
said the king.
"The workers told me rain is coming, but they think they can get back to the village before it pours if they don't waste any time. Yesterday, Sir Andrew and I planned that he would sit down with all of us for a meal before the last trip. I wanted to hear more about the people in the village and how they are faring. And I wanted Sir Andrew to learn more from Agnes about what everyone did during the last big flood, so he could bring this knowledge to the villagers. But now, with more rain coming, there's no time to talk. We must send people back to their homes as fast as we can."
When Ronduin and the king reached the new kitchen, the workers were already walking out of the room, carrying bags of vegetables and grains.
"Goodbye, Prince Ronduin, and fare thee well,"
said Ellen, a young woman who usually helped cook Agnes in the kitchen.
"May all be well with you and your family,"
replied Ronduin.
"I'll go down to the boat to help everyone get settled,"
said the king.
"Ronduin, please go back to watching from the sitting room. Let me know when they reach the forest. I pray that they get to the trees before the rain."
"Yes, father,"
said Ronduin.
"Do I have time to look at the chickens on my way?"
"Certainly,"
said his father.
"but don't stay too long."
Ronduin found Sunset and Sunrise napping peacefully together in one of the baskets. He noticed that they still had plenty of water. He saw that some food remained in their bowl. Looking up at the sky, he could see the dark clouds creeping in toward the castle. Ronduin slowly opened the door and stepped into the hallway. He tried to be as quiet as snow falling on a windless day, so he would not disturb the chickens. When he got back to the sitting room, Ronduin looked out the window and saw that the rowboat had just come out the big doors. He waved, and for a moment, Ronduin was convinced that his wave had not been seen. But now, Sir Andrew took both oars in his left hand, so he could use his right hand to wave. Now everyone in the boat waved at Ronduin, who continued waving wildly until Sir Andrew grasped an oar in each hand and pulled away from the castle with sure, strong strokes. For a few minutes, the boat traveled over the dirt road that was usually bordered by bushes. But now Sir Andrew veered to the right and headed out across the field in the direction of the road that parted the forest. The farther the boat traveled from the castle, the smaller it seemed to become. Ronduin knew it was silly, but he couldn't stop himself from waving again. Just a small wave, for he was sure that he could no longer be seen by the travelers. He stood at the window with a tear trickling down his cheek as he waved and waved until Sir Andrew and the villagers turned into the channel between the trees and could no longer be seen. Now the rain began, softly at first, and then harder. "At least they are almost home and are sheltered by the trees," thought Ronduin, feeling a sudden chill. The door to the sitting room opened just then, and in walked Ronduin's parents. "The boat just now moved into the forest," said Ronduin. "The rain waited until they had shelter from the trees." "They will be fine," said the queen. They all wore woolen coats and capes that will keep them warm even if they get wet. The king carried a small iron pot with 3 legs. He sat it by the fireplace. Ronduin dug into the wood box for a small log and a pile of twigs. These he placed on the hearth. The king reached for the tongs that sat by the fire. He used the tongs to reach into the pot and pulled out a hot coal. Reaching in again, he placed 2 more coals on the twigs. Ronduin Ronduin balanced one end of a second small log on the twigs and picked up the bellows and began to puff air toward the coals. The coal brightened into glowing redness. Soon, the twigs burst into flame. Ronduin's father crouched in front of the fire, took the bellows, and gave an occasional puff of air to encourage the flames. When the twigs had become flameless coals and had not yet ignited the logs, the king reached into the firebox and grabbed more twigs, which he carefully laid on the glowing twigs. He poked at the area with a stick from the box, moved the top log until it was in the hottest spot, and puffed more air from the bellows. The new twigs burst into flame, and, after a few minutes, the upper log was in flame. Ronduin's father added a large log, confident that the fire would now continue to burn. Ronduin remembered building a fire with Sir Andrew. He remembered helping cook Agnes with the kitchen fire. He remembered tending fires on his own. But he could not remember ever building a fire with his father the king. He realized that except for Cook Agnes, all the workers who usually filled wood boxes and built fires and tended fires in the castle had gone home. He realized that he had not known until now that his father was skilled in building a fire. Watching the first fire he had ever built with his father, Ronduin wondered what other skills his father and mother would show in the weeks ahead. Chapter 15, Little Sunrise Come to Me. Ronduin woke in the morning twilight and dressed in his linen shirt and the peasant breeches that he wore to school. He picked up the jug of water and the pail of chicken food he had left by the door to his room and walked down the quiet hallway to the balcony. Here, he found the chickens wide awake. They stood by their empty food bowl, tipping their heads to the left and to the right, as if they were asking why no food had appeared. "Just a minute," said Ronduin. "I've got plenty of food for you." Pouring the food from the pail to their food dish, he said, "Look, it's yummy turnip peels and bits of porridge from the queen's very own bowl. She never finishes her porridge. Here are crumbs of bread I collected from the breadboard, and my mother gave me too much kale and I didn't finish it, so I brought it for you." The chickens pecked at their food while Ronduin poured their old water over the rail. He listened to it splash into the water below. Then he poured water from the jug into the water bowl. "Agnes told me to come for breakfast when the sun is fully risen, but the sun isn't up yet, so I can't stay though." Ronduin looked for a good place to sit on the floor. When he found a clean spot, he sat down cross-legged with his back against the railing. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a handful of grain and held it out toward the chickens. Sunrise took one cautious step toward Ronduin. She tipped her head to the right and then to the left. Ronduin sat very still. He was totally quiet. Sunrise took one more step. "Only 2 more steps until you reach my hand," thought Ronduin. He waited. Sunrise stood still like a statue. Suddenly, rays of sun brightened the door to the hallway. Ronduin didn't dare turn his head to see the sun rising over the far turret. He knew that his slightest movement would likely scare the hen. Ronduin pictured Sunrise nibbling out of his hand. "If I'm really calm and really quiet, perhaps she will be brave enough to come to me," he thought. Ronduin's arms began to ache. "I didn't think I could get tired from holding a small handful of oats," he thought. He looked Sunrise directly in the eye and smiled at her. She took one more step. Will talking to her scare her or calm her? He wondered, and then he started singing. He didn't plan to sing to Sunrise. It just happened. Very softly, he sang.
Little chicken, hear my plea. Little sunrise, come to me.
Sunrise took one more step. Ronduin's right hand held the grain, and his left hand rested near the hem of his shirt. He took the hem between his fingers. Sunrise took a short step and pecked at the grain in Ronduin's hand. It tickled. He smiled and managed to keep the giggles inside. Now, Ronduin could feel the warmth of the sun on the back of his neck. He knew the sun had fully risen. Ronduin slowly pulled his right hand toward his body. Sunrise followed his hand, and when Ronduin's fingers came to rest near his stomach, she again pecked at the grain. That's when Ronduin reached around the bird with his left arm and drew her close. He tucked her under his left arm and fed her from his right hand. He waited for her to finish the grain, and then, while continuing to hold the hen, he leaned forward and rose to a standing position. Turning, they saw the golden sun, fully risen, lighting up the edges of the clouds. Ronduin remembered a song he had learned at school. He felt like he had learned it just so he could sing it to his chickens at this very moment. The golden sun, so great and bright, warms the world with all its might. It makes the earth so green and fair, and tends each thing with ceaseless care. It shines on blossom, stone, and tree. He paused and smiled at Sunrise, then sang the next part about birds. On bird and beast, on you and me, so may each deed throughout the day, may everything we do and say be bright and strong and true, O golden sun like you. Chapter 16, A Mystery. The sun is fully up, thought Ronduin, smiling. He put Sunrise down and looked into the two baskets. Each basket held one lovely egg. He put a handful of straw in the empty food bucket, and then carefully laid the eggs in the bucket on the straw. Goodbye, sunrise. Goodbye, sunset, he said, as he stepped out the door. Ronduin usually moved as quickly as possible as he wove his way around the scaffolding. But today, carrying a bucket with two precious eggs, he walked slowly down the third-floor hallway and down the stairway. As he opened the second-floor doorway, he almost bumped into Cook Agnes. "Good day, Prince Ronduin," she said, stepping to the side to make room for him to walk beside her. "Good day to you," said Ronduin. Cook Agnes carried a large basket in her right hand. It was heavy with turnips and onions and carrots. Her left hand grasped a walking stick. "Look at those lovely eggs," she said to Ronduin, peering into his bucket. Cook Agnes and Ronduin walked slowly down the hallway together, even more slowly than Ronduin had walked on the third floor. Ronduin realized that the heavy basket was hard for her to carry. "Let's trade," said Ronduin. "You take the eggs, and I'll carry the basket." "Thank you," said Cook Agnes, as Ronduin lifted the heavy basket and handed her the light bucket. Ronduin wrapped both arms around the big basket. It was heavy, but he had no problem carrying it. "The king and queen ate their morning meal before the sun had fully risen," said Cook Agnes. "Then we went to the new storage room. It's quite a mess. When the first floor flooded, the workers were in such a hurry to move the food that they had to leave it in piles on the floor in the new storage room. I came back with a basket full of food, and the queen and king stayed to organize the food on shelves and tables." "Should I go help them?" asked Ronduin. "Not today," Cook Agnes answered. The queen told me to bring you with me when I go to the first floor, but first you must eat your porridge. Cook Agnes and Ronduin sat together in the new kitchen eating porridge. Why are we going to the first floor? Asked Ronduin. I had just started working in the castle as a kitchen helper when a flood much like this one happened. I was just a little bit older than you are now, said Cook Agnes. I remembered that the lower stairway near the dining hall was stained from a deep water many years ago. When the stain began to fade, they wanted to make a permanent mark that showed the highest level of the water. So they chiseled out a stone on the side of the step at the high point of the flood. Your parents want us to go down there and try to find the gap in the wall. Then we will know for sure whether this flood is deeper than that one. When Ronduin and Cook Agnes stepped into the staircase, Ronduin already felt that something was different. Something had changed since he walked down these stairs to help with the green rowboat. It was something about the sound. The echo of their footsteps sounded different. Then he saw it. Midway down the steps, looking out toward the scaffolding, he realized the water had grown higher. Now the water lapped over the edge of the scaffolding. The water had come so high that the plank of wood that had connected the stairs to the temporary dock had floated away. Ronduin spotted the piece of wood floating near the dining hall. He thought it looked lost and lonely. The water is higher than it was when I was here holding the boat, said Ronduin. How can that be? Asked Cook Agnes. I don't understand it either, said Ronduin. The only rain since Sir Andrew left with the last boatload of workers happened just as the boat entered the forest. It only rained for a few minutes. Ronduin walked quickly to the last step before the water. Cook Agnes followed slowly, leaning on her walking stick. She sat down on a dry step and handed Ronduin the walking stick. They chiseled out a stone on that side, she said, pointing to the left side of the stairway. Use my walking stick to see if you can find the spot with the missing stone. Ronduin took the stick and poked along the wall, checking for a gap, one step at a time. Not this one, he said, as he felt a solid rock wall along the first underwater step. And not this one, he said, moving down one more step. And not this one, he said, as he discovered that the third step also had solid stones alongside it. Now Ronduin reached for the fourth step that was underwater, but the stick was too short. He took off his shoes and stockings and stepped onto the first step underwater. The water felt cold, very cold. His peasant breeches came just past his knees. He thought he could manage to keep them dry, but when he crouched down to reach the fourth underwater step with the stick, he soaked the edge of his breeches. And then, there it was, a gap in the wall. I found it! I found it! Said Ronduin. There's a hole in the wall right next to the fourth step. Oh my, said Cook Agnes. 4 steps lower than the water level today. Still standing in the cold water, Ronduin looked up the stairwell and carefully counted the dry steps. He counted twice just to be sure. 22 dry steps to the landing, he said. I've been trying to remember what happened during that flood long ago, said Cook Agnes. I don't remember exactly how many days until the water went down, but it was a long time. And then we still couldn't travel because the deep mud would eat your boots and lame your horse. The water is deeper now, so it will take longer to go away. Now Ronduin stepped out of the water. He noticed that the edge of his pants were wet, and he felt a sudden chill. Let's get you dry and warm, said Cook Agnes. Go along to your bedchamber and get dry breeches on. By the time you get back to the new kitchen, the fire will be roaring. Rondoin stood at the window in his dry breeches and looked out toward the village. He could not see the town, of course, for it was hidden behind the forest. But today he could see something that had been hidden during the time of rain. Beyond the forest, he saw the hills and the mountains. Looking at the mountains, he wondered whether the people in the high hill towns had been soaked by days of rain. But there, the water would run downhill in the small creeks, he thought. Here, in the flat lands near the big river and the wide lake, the water just stays, and strangely even gets deeper even after the rain stops. Rondoin felt a little chill and remembered that Cook Agnes was building up the fire. I can sit by the fire and think about the magic of this rising water, he thought.